That thing is always listening.
No, I know. I know. I find myself like I probably should be mindful of what I'm saying around the Siri just in case.
Well, your phones and Alexa
Yes.
and everybody else in your house that you have a
Yes.
smart something.
The bad news is, Joey, that everybody is listening except for my children.
Exactly.
Everybody else is desperate to know what I have to say. My children, not so much. Okay, well, here we are at 2 o'clock, and I try to be pretty darn good about starting meetings on time to respect your time. And I want to start off by saying, for those of you here, thank you so very much for being generous with your time. I know it's our most valuable commodity, and for you to share it with us, not only in this meeting, but in doing this project, I am very, very grateful for that. So, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a quick PowerPoint today and really discuss not only where we are with the plan, but give you a look as to what's in the plan and also talk about what we need to do and where we're going with that plan. I think most of you saw the agenda that we're working on. I run, as you know, a very loose ship. So if at any juncture you've got questions, comments, concerns, you want to jump forward to something, you want to jump back to something, I'm very, very happy to accommodate you on that. So, with all that having been said, let's run through the slideshow and let's talk about our hazard mitigation plan. So I gave you the introduction. Let's jump into our participating jurisdictions. So we're coming up to the end of the process here. And one of the things that we want to discuss is who's been involved in the plan, who's been playing and jumping into the pool with us. And so we actually have two flavors of participating jurisdictions for this plan. We have something called adopting jurisdictions. And the key here is that the adopting jurisdictions will adopt the plan themselves. And in order to be considered adopting jurisdiction, we had a couple of metrics that you had to jump through, a couple of hoops that you had to jump through. First one was participating in the planning meetings. The second one was helping us out with information. When we send a request for information out or a request for review out, you get it back to us. The third one, and the big one really, was those identification and review of your mitigation action items. And remember, a mitigation action item is if someone handed your community a bag of money and said, make things safer for your citizens in the long term, what would you do with that money? We wanted you to review and comment on the draft sections of the plan. We sent you a couple of these from sections 1 to 3, which was the introduction and a review of how we did the planning and what's changing about us. You've had a section that talks about our capability assessment. So we wanted you to review and comment on those. We wanted you to foster the public input process. So, do community outreach, let people know about these meetings, let people know that there's surveys out there that they can fill out. So we really wanted you to involve them in that. And then finally, as an adopting jurisdiction, once this plan is approved by FEMA, we need you to adopt it through your normal adoption mechanisms. Now, we also have a second flavor of participating jurisdictions here, and these are called participating stakeholder communities. In general terms, we ask them to do just about the same thing. The difference is that they do not have to adopt the plan. They will be considered adopting when the county adopts. And the only difference with this is that in order to do hazard mitigation actions, they would work with the county to do those. So they would work with the county to submit those for consideration. And then if they got approved, they would work with the county in managing those. And the idea is that for some of our smaller jurisdictions, we felt like this was a very good fit because they may not have the full raft of capabilities to do what needs to be done. And so looking at it through that lens, this is what we come up with. This is a blown up of what we have in the plan here, but we've got our adopting jurisdictions in yellow. We've got our participating stakeholder communities in green, and we've got Siskiyou County as our sort of anchor in the middle there. Now, the key thing to remember is that none of this is set in stone. We can always change things, for a little bit while longer here, where if you're saying, hey, you know what, we don't really have the internal capability to be able to apply for and manage hazard mitigation grants. We'd like to be able to be considered under the county. You absolutely can. Or on the flip side of that, if you're like, we want to stand on our own. We want to manage it on our own for both Happy Camp CSD and McLeod CSD. We can also make it so that you stand on your own. So again, this isn't set in stone, but the idea behind it was we wanted to understand and match capabilities. Okay, let's talk about our hazards a little bit because this is going to be the next big review section. When we talked about our hazards, I want you to recall that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, requires that we only consider natural hazards in our hazard mitigation plan. And we do this and we focus on this in this plan for one, maybe two particular reasons. The first one is that FEMA, when they're reviewing this plan, doesn't really even read. Well, that's not true. They do read, but they can't comment or fail or pass a plan on human caused or technological hazards. They just kind of ignore it. The other reason is because when you are looking to receive hazard mitigation grant funding, whether it's from Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities or the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program or a raft of others, it is a very, very, very slim probability that you would get funding to mitigate against a human caused or technological hazards. I'm not saying that it is not possible. I'm just saying that the likelihood is very, very small. And so what we do is we write this as a natural hazards hazard mitigation plan. And for our natural hazards, we come from dam failure all the way through wildfire. Now, this is a little bit different from your last plan because what we did is we conglomerated some things together. In particular, we looked at landslide, which many of you identified as a hazard that you were concerned about. But in landslide, we considered avalanche as well. And with severe weather, we conglomerated a whole bunch of components of severe weather together. We could hail, lightning, strong wind, and then in the winter severe weather categories, blizzards, ice storms, and winter weather. You will also notice in our natural hazards that we included now extreme heat at your request. We said, if you're worried about it as a potential hazard, we're going to include that in there. So these are the hazards that we consider, and these are the hazards that we really evaluate in our plan. Now, when we talk about the evaluation, the first thing we want to do is we understand what's changing in conditions since the last time we did this plan. What has changed? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? So
Can we
we've
talk
got this.
about that?
I'm sorry.
Can we talk about this?
Talk about, yes, absolutely,
The
please.
hazards. So
Yes.
my concern with combining avalanche with landslide is that those are two completely different things. Um, like they're different. Like one is because of snow and one is because of usually heavy rain. And so they're two completely different things and they occur in different areas. Um, and like landslides are much more likely to impact communities in Siskiyou County, whereas avalanches, I mean, really Mount Shasta is one of the only areas that does like has that, and it's usually away from people. So it's just I'm just concerned about lumping those two together, and then with severe weather as well, like lumping all the winter weather stuff with the stormy weather stuff, which is typically in the spring or summertime, fall. That I'm a little concerned about that too because those are two completely different things as well.
Yeah. So, and I can show you, and what I can do is Stefan, I'm gonna release the plan to you to see, and you can see how they're woven together. We don't consider them the same thing. And as we jump on here, I'll show you what that means. Like when we give an explanation of a landslide, we say, here are the kinds of landslides that we're talking about. Here's the differentiation between a landslide and an avalanche. Now, technically, you can have something called a debris avalanche as well, which is sort of under that category, but we differentiate exactly how they are different. And then when we look at the risk analysis for them, we break them out as well. So we don't say, hey, all landslides and avalanches are the same. We say landslides are one thing, avalanches are another thing, and then we break them out so they're under different categories. And you can see how that's articulated in the plan. And I'll show you that in a second. We'll circle back to that. The same thing goes for the severe weather category. Quite truthfully, if we were looking at severe weather, which you had included in your last plan, Siskiyou County is not really known for hail, lightning, and strong winds. Strong winds, I would take a more of a heavy lean to, but hail and lightning, not so much. You're also not so much known for ice storms. Blizzards and winter weathers you are absolutely known for. And again, what we do is we kick those categories out separately under the consideration of severe weather and put the differentiations in there and also the differences and vulnerabilities in there. And we can always revisit that. The plan can always be reshaped a little bit, but the idea is that avalanche is such a specific niche concern that for 90% of our communities, maybe even 100% of our communities, it's not really a hazard, right? If you're running a ski area, it's absolutely a hazard, but we don't have any effect on that. And so we put avalanche in there to sort of give it some consideration. Stefan, your point is well taken. Let me show you what we've got, and then we can always circle back to that. Sound fair enough? Okay.
Yep.
So what we do here is we talk about the changing in conditions in these things. So we say, look, what's happening? Is it getting better or is it getting worse? And we try to put some notes from our research in here to say why we think that these conditions are changing. For example, here down under volcanic activity, well, the geologic conditions haven't changed, right? There is no change in the condition for this. But if we look at something like extreme heat, well, we can look at something like extreme heat and say, data indicates that the number of high temperature days, well, they're increasing. And we think that continued climate change is going to make this problem even worse. And so we try to prognosticate as to how we think these changes are going to impact us. We also look at our changes in vulnerability. So we say, hey, look, what has changed about us that may make us more vulnerable or less vulnerable to these identified hazards? And again, we say it's decreasing, increasing, or unchanged. And we try to put a metric there as to why we feel that is. So if we look at earthquake, we say, hey, look, we've got a decline in population, and fewer people means we have, well, fewer people at risk. But our aging infrastructure and structures, that probably is going to increase our vulnerability. So we say that we feel the vulnerability on that is unchanged. And again, we try to justify as to why this is. Now, in doing this, we use a lot of data, as much data as we can.
Can we talk about that too?
I'm sorry?
Can we talk about that too?
Yeah, go ahead, Stefan. Right, go, please.
So for wildfire especially, it's definitely increasing. So I don't want that to say that it's unchanged. We've seen the number of fires increase greatly in the last 10 years or so in Siskiyou County. So that is definitely increasing for wildfire. Flood, I would like that to say that it's increasing as well. With climate change, we're more likely to see heavier instances of rainfall as the air is able to hold more moisture. And so we should probably align that with, the best available science. And so that we should say that's increasing as well.
So again, two different things we're conflating here. The changing in conditions for flood and wildfire, we say they're absolutely worsening, right? Again, and that is with flood, we say rainfall occurrence is lessened, but the number of heavy rainfall events is increased. And then we say the increase in wildfires is exacerbated conditions related to flash flooding because we have denuded slopes that is going to potentially increase that. Same thing with wildfire. I'm sorry, this is cut off on the bottom here a little bit, but we're saying that extreme heat and drought conditions are making things worse. However, on the vulnerability, what we try to do is we try to understand what our community vulnerabilities are. And so we say, do we have a shrinking population, fewer people potentially exposed to this risk? Do we have less habitated or less occupied housing, which would again potentially lower this risk? And so I don't want to conflate the two things there. The vulnerability we think is remaining unchanged. You don't have thousands of people moving in. You don't have thousands of structure being built, but the chances of occurrence, that's absolutely getting worse.
Got it. Sorry, I didn't see that they had changed. They look so similar.
No problem at all. And I Stefan, you should know we've talked about this a whole lot. I love input, buddy, and I love talking about this stuff. So please let me know if you've got questions or want to talk about stuff.
And really quick, Matt,
okay.
Where?
Yep, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's Juliana. Where are you considering rain on snow events? Like, how are you guys categorizing that within the hazards themselves? Since we're more likely going to have some rain on snow events causing some flash flooding, but are you putting that under severe weather events? Or are you putting that under flooding?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So, Juliana, what we say under the severe weather events is that that normal precipitation that normally would fall as snow is really starting, because of the changing temperatures, to start coming down in rain. And so we're having more uncontrolled events like that. And that's kind of where we start talking about that under those severe weather categories. There is a little bit of that in flooding. And so what we talk about in flooding is really a couple flavors in there: urban flooding, flash flooding, and riverine flooding. Now, the causes of that flooding we touch on a little bit. We touch on as to why we think those are increasing. So it's really covered in both areas.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to help. Okay. So how do we start categorizing these hazards? How do we start looking at what's happening with these hazards? Well, one of the things, and this is new to the plan, is we use the FEMA National Risk Index. And what the National Risk Index is it's a rating of hazard potential. And it uses a bunch of inputs and metrics to give us a rating. What it does is it looks at the expected annual loss. So it looks at a whole bunch of data over a lot of years, and it says, this is the amount of damage that has been done by this hazard. And then it'll divide it out and say, every year we can expect, on average, this amount of damage from this particular hazard for this particular area. They then multiply it by a kicker that considers two things: your social vulnerability, so your susceptible social groups and what their impacts are, and your community resilience, what kind of capabilities you are, how strong you are. And that gives you something called the National Risk Index. And what it looks like is this. So this right here is our risk index for all natural hazards by census block for Siskiyou County. And what we do is we tie a community to a census block. Now, we know that that is not necessarily the most fantastical way to do it, but it is the most granular we can get with this particular data. And then what it does is it says, here is your risk index, and this is for all natural hazards, and it gives you a national percentile score here. But we also take a look at this through the lens of individual hazards. And Stefan, this is kind of where we were talking about that kick out. This is the risk index for drought by census block. But for example, for landslide and avalanche, we break this out into two categories. We say, what's our risk index for avalanche? And what's our risk index for landslide? And again, what this tells us is, here's your risk index by census block and your national percentile for this particular hazard. We also do it for your expected annual loss. Now, we do your expected annual loss for all hazards. And what we tell you is what your EAL score is, your national percentile, what your building EAL, so this is an annual loss, is expected to be, your population and your equivalent fatalities, your agricultural loss, and then we give you this composite expected annual loss from all hazards. So again, you can look at this and say, all right, every year, if we are the McLeod Community Services District, on average, we suffer around $1 million of losses from all hazards. That's our average loss. And again, what we do is we break this out by, oh, I'm sorry, I lost that slide. We break it out by individual hazards as well. And so when we look at something like, and I'll go back here, I apologize. When we look at something like severe weather, these tables right here, we do each one of these tables for each severe weather component. So we say, hey, look, here is your expected annual loss for blizzards. Here's your expected annual loss for ice storms. Here's your expected annual loss from winter weather. And so we break it down into those individual categories so we have a risk at all the things that are considered under that hazard heading.
Can we talk about this too?
Yeah, of course.
NRI, I really hate it, but I completely understand why we're using this. It makes total sense. The one thing that I would say is the agricultural loss column, FEMA grants don't do anything for that. So I wish we could like maybe add another column right before agricultural loss that says like building and population equivalents total, and then like have agricultural loss as a separate one, just because like FEMA grants are for life and property. That's really all they're concerned about with brick. Like you don't do brick grants for cornfields. And
You're breaking up there, buddy. I'm only getting every other word.
Steven, we lost your
there
mic.
you go. So, Seven, to your point's well taken with that. One of the things that we try to show, and we try to take this sort of holistic view of risk to the county. And, again, the agricultural expected annual loss, we put that in there as really a courtesy to your agricultural community because we recognize that they're knitted into the fabric of this. And some of us you'll see have got very, very low agricultural loss figures. And some of us go kind of quite high. Like Montague has got a fairly big agricultural loss. So again, one of the things that we want to consider here is a holistic view to the community. To your point, you are probably not, just like natural hazards, going to get any kind of funding really for agricultural mitigation. They are not going to pay you to mitigate a cornfield. However, we wanted to put this in there. And again, this is nothing set in stone. All I'm doing is giving you my justification for it. We put that in there to show you an idea of what the overall losses are in toto to the community. Nothing set in stone. If you guys really hate it, easy to take out. It's a column to remove, and it's easy to take out.
I guess on that point, Matt, is there, this is Juliana again, I apologize. Just on that point then, I mean, if we're adding that, I mean, is there a discussion for commerce loss? I mean, we have Interstate 5, we have Union Pacific rail lines. And so what is the EAL on any type of loss of commerce due to the shutdown of those, core routes, Highway 3, for Scott Valley, things like that? If we're going to add agriculture, I think commerce is probably going to be a lot higher. And I mean, it's kind of going towards this like subcategory of economic loss. And there's a lot of other kind of aspects to that could be lent into, the discussion of potential loss. So I'm curious if there's a commerce discussion or any other type of those pieces.
Yeah. So let's put a pin in that because I will circle back to that in the next couple of slides, but your point's well taken. I will tell you that the National Risk Index itself does not have a commerce category because that is notoriously difficult to estimate what that loss actually is. And so that's not actually considered in this, but we actually do consider it in the plan. So Juliana, if I can beg of you a few minutes, we'll kind of come back to that.
Oh, good.
Okay. Now, we also use data from the National Centers for Environmental Information, the NCEI. And what we use this really to do is understand occurrence data. Now, this is a flawed system, and everybody recognizes it, but it's one of the best that we have available to use. And the problem with the system is it will tell you about events, but when it gives you damage estimates, when it gives you damage estimates, they are artificially low. And that is because of the way that events are reported to the NCEI. It's often done by the National Weather Service. And when they report the event, they don't have the actual damage figures from that event. And when the damage figures do come in, the system is not rectified to that. And so a lot of times we'll have an event that had an impact, but it shows as a $0 impact. And we write about that fairly extensively in the plan as to the limitations of this. But this is almost a nationally recognized usage of this system to try to understand occurrence data. And this is what it looks like. So what we do is we say, okay, we go back to 1950 in this data and we say, these are the number of NCEI reported flood events and flash flood events. This is the property damage that was reported, and these are the deaths and injuries that were reported. But you look at this and you would say, I am very suspicious that we have had $0 in flash flood damage. And I would say, you're absolutely right. And we say that in there, that we feel that this is an artificially low figure, that it does not reflect what really the damages are. However, we are trying to look at event occurrence here. And what we can do with this then is we can say, here's the expected average events per year, the deaths and injuries, the average events of average deaths and injuries per year, and then the average property damage. We recognize that this is a limited system with limited capabilities, but in order to understand this, we use it to augment the data. And quite truthfully, the NRI also uses a lot of this data to make their determinations. Well, we try to augment this. We try to go even further. We try to do HAZAS modeling. So HAZA is a FEMA program. It's Hazards of the United States, and it's a software tool to help estimate potential losses. For this plan, HAZAS was used because it is a limited system for floods and earthquakes. And what it allows us to do is we can run some different models in there, and it will calculate the level of damage. And so we can use this HAZAS system to say, all right, let's run a model and let's see what happens when we run this model. And that is included in there as well to give us an idea on that. And then we go even further than this when we're trying to understand our hazards. And Juliana, this goes back to what you were asking about. What we try to do is we try to understand the vulnerability and impact analysis for this entire set of things right here. We look at what the potential vulnerabilities and the impacts are of a hazard occurrence on the population. For example, we can do some metrics here where we can look at the number of houses in identified floodplains, and then we can extrapolate from that using census data a rough number of how many people are occupying floodplains. We can do the same thing with buildings and structures. And then with the buildings and structures, again, we can get an idea of how many are in a floodplain. It's not an exact science, but we can get an idea. And then we can use census data on the average cost of a house in Siskiyou County and come up with a potential at-risk figure. So we can really start talking some dollar figures here, again, as estimates to give you an idea. Juliana, to your point, we take a look at things like transportation and electrical infrastructure, and we talk about what happens if these are damaged and what are the potential repair costs for them. So what is the cost to repair a bridge? What is the cost to rebuild a bridge? What is the cost to rebuild a hydroelectric power plant? All of that is considered in there, so we have an idea of what is at risk and what is vulnerable. We also take a look at potential cascading impacts. We recognize that, if you have an event of one hazard, oftentimes it will cause cascading impacts that can impact you. So we enumerate those, and then we do a final consequence analysis as to what this is going to, what the hazard will reflect based on communications, infrastructure, things like that. And so this is done for every identified hazards in the plan to the best of our abilities with the best data that we have possible. We also do a lot of mapping in here. So we try to understand, for example, under wildland urban infrastructure, wildland urban interface areas, where they are, what we've got in there. So we try to put as much mapping in there as well to really understand what is vulnerable and what is at risk. Okay. Now that we've codified all of that, we want to talk about your hazard mitigation actions. And one of the things we did, it's probably more than a month ago, we sent out your old hazard mitigation action items and asked you to review them to say, are these still viable? Do we still, if they are still viable, do we still want to do them in the future? Or have we even completed these? Or are these hazard actions that we don't want to do anymore? They don't make sense for us anymore. So we sent those out. Now, what the Federal Emergency Management Agency requires is that for each identified natural hazard in the plan that could potentially impact your jurisdiction, you have to have at least one action to mitigate that hazard. That is written into the review requirements for this plan. Now, those actions can be actions carried forward from the previous plan, so old actions that you didn't commit, or new actions. And so what we asked you to do is, for your previous actions, we said, go in there and tell us about them. Did you complete them? Do you not want to do them anymore? Do you want to do them, but you didn't have the money or you didn't have the personnel? Do you want to revise them? Or are these actions that are ongoing, meaning that we continuously do that, but they're mitigation action items like participation in the National Flood Insurance Program? That is an ongoing action that is regular in nature. And so what we wanted to do was this. we wanted to look at our completed action. So this is from Stefan at Dunsmuir. He sent him in and he said, from our old plan, these are actions that we have completed. They're done. And so we want to note that because it's a feather in our cap. We also said, are there any actions that you don't want to do? And so you can say, hey, yeah, we don't want to do this because, well, this is technically not a mitigation action item. Or we don't want to do this because it's not technologically feasible, or we'll never have the money to be able to do it. But we wanted to get rid of actions that were no longer viable or reasonable. We then wanted you to consider revising some of your mitigation actions. So again, Stefan with Dunsmuir said, yeah, we're going to look at these and now we're going to revise them. And so what he did is under the status here, we've got revised, and this is the revised description, and these are the revised responsible parties and the costing. These have been fully revised actions. And then finally, we said, what actions do you want to carry over? And we'll talk about the new mitigations in a second. But Siskiyou County said, hey, we want to participate in the community rating system. We haven't done it yet, but we still would like to do that. And the reason we didn't do it is we just didn't have the staffing to throw the full necessary load at it. We didn't have the full staff capability to be able to do what needed to be done. But yes, we would still like to consider this. And so based on that review, what we did is this mitigation action cross-check. And what we wanted to make sure was that for each hazard, there was at least one action in there. Now, the catch-all to that is something called all hazards. And many of you had actions in there that you said were all hazards. Now, whether I agree with that or not, and for some of them I absolutely don't, but you had them in there. So for Mount Shasta, for example, Mount Shasta, all of their 41 action items were considered all hazard actions. And you'll see here then that for all of these hazards, they technically apply. However, if we go back up to Dunsmuir said, hey, we've got a bunch of all hazards actions, but now we're going to start getting specific. For dam failure, we've got action 14. For extreme heat, we've got 15 and 16. And these numbers tie to your mitigation action items. And I'll jump you back here. They tie to this action identification. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we've got all of them. Now, you'll also see that for some of our communities, we've got a not applicable. Tule Lake is not worried about dam failure. They do not have an extremely high or high hazard dam that can fail near them that would impact them. And so they said, we are not worried about this. And so again, that's a perfectly reasonable answer because those answers are justified in the hazard descriptions. Now, the final step with this is, would you like to add any new actions? And if you want to add any new actions, we absolutely encourage you to do so. Because, and if I'm just being candid here, Cal OES and FEMA may look at some of these actions and say, not really. And they can actually send the plan back based on that not really. I don't know what their feeling is, but I've seen it happen before. And so if you want to add new actions in there, we absolutely encourage you to add potentially hazard-specific actions in there. If you are worried about drought for your community, perhaps you want to consider doing, xeriscaping or native plant planting near all of your jurisdictional buildings, or maybe you want to install low-flow toilets or whatever it may be. Is there a specific action that you would like to do to mitigate a particular hazard? If so, this is the format you use. And I will send this out to Owen to send on to you a blank copy of this where you can fill it in. And the only thing we ask is that when you're filling it in, you fill it in completely. The first one is put your jurisdiction in there and then put a number. Describe the project. Tell us what the project is going to do. Tell us what hazard or hazards it's going to address. So it may be one that addresses drought and wildfire, or it may be one that addresses, flooding and dam failure. Who the responsible party is, and that must be a position. It cannot be a department. It has to be a position. The overall priority. in the last review format we sent you, we explained all this, but there's a priority ranking in there and how you come on high, medium, or low. In the last one we sent you as well, we also said what goal or goals are you addressing, and we gave you our 6 goals in there. We asked you to estimate the ballpark cost. Estimate and ballpark, that's the same thing, but you get the idea. Whether that is a dollar figure, or whether that is staff time, or whether that is a combination of staff time and a dollar figure. We do not need a full benefit cost analysis or a full costing analysis of it. We do not need that, but we do need a ballpark figure as to what this is going to cost. We want to propose completion time frame. All things being equal, if you had lots of money, how fast would you like to see this done? Is it in 5 years? Is it in 10 years? Is it in 1 year? And then the status is going to be new. And so again, if you want to add hazard mitigations to augment that list of actions that we put in there for you, we absolutely encourage you to do so. Okay, let's talk about the plan format. Now, the good news with the plan is we are about 80%-ish, maybe a little bit more done with the plan. In fact, for our mitigation planning committee members, our goal is to release the very draft version of the plan to you next week. We want you to get eyes on it before our open public meetings. And so we're going to try to release that to you early next week so that you can read through it. And in general terms, this is what your plan is going to look like. Section 1 and 2, we call that setting the stage. Your introductions, assurances, and adoptions, and your planning process, how we did this. Section 3 are the changes in us. What's happened to our populations, to our housing, what's happening to our schools, what's going on with big infrastructure development projects. Sections 1, 2, and 3, you have seen before. Section 4, the capability assessment, you have also seen. It is what makes us strong. And again, we ask you to comment on that and tell us about any changes. For those of you who are doing this, one of the things that I would ask is we still don't have a full understanding of your ISO rating. That's your fire rating. And so if you know your ISO rating, if you would let me know, I would be very grateful. It is a very, very hard thing to find. Now, section 5 is your hazard section. And again, we talked about what that looks like today. This is a new section for you to review, but you'll see that we've got an introduction, our disasters, our summaries, and then each one of our identified hazards has got its own standalone section. Section 6 is the mitigation strategy. Now, you've been involved in this, but this is just a formalized write-up of that. So it says, how did we do that? You have seen almost all of this. And so this should be nothing new for you. It's just bringing it all together. And then finally, section 7 is a fairly straightforward one when we talk about the next time, how we're going to keep this plan up to date, what we're going to do to do that, how we're going to do evaluations and reviews. We also have included appendices. Now, we try not to be too appendix heavy because if it's valuable information, we want to put it in the plan. But what we put in here is our adoptions, our letters of adoptions, and our approval documentation from FEMA. We put in our community feedback. So we're going to release a second survey here for our community to fill out, and we're going to put all of the feedback from that in there, as well as when necessary and when applicable, we're going to weave it into the plan. One of the things we asked is for your critical facility details. So we asked you, hey, tell us about your buildings, the square footage and the valuation. For those of you that we've received that from, we have put that into the plan to give an idea of your facilities and what their valuation is. And then finally, Appendix D is all of your jurisdictional mitigation actions. That's where we put all of the actions in that appendix. So it's a standalone appendix where you can pull that out as necessary. So that's what your plan looks like. We have simplified it as much as we could. As you recall, in our last meeting, we talked about getting rid of the appendixes or the jurisdictional annexes because they are not a requirement in any way, shape, or form for a FEMA or Cal OES approved plan. And so what we did is we got rid of a lot of that duplication and, quite truthfully, a lot of that unevenness, and pulled all of the data and all the information into the main body of the plan to make it even, useful, and non-duplicative. Okay, let's talk about the status of our jurisdictional homework. So the things that we've asked you to do, the two big ones were, well, review the plan, and in particular, do your capability review. And one of the things that we mentioned at the last meeting was we are sending this out. If we don't hear back from you, we're assuming that nothing has changed. And so if we did not hear back from you, we assume nothing has changed. For those of you that did respond back, all of your comments and changes have been incorporated into the plan, and thank you. Now, your mitigation action review. We did not hear a lot back from a lot of you. And so what we did is we pulled them forward and we considered them all to be either ongoing or not completed because you didn't have the money, or not completed because you didn't have the staff. The only other option that was available for us to do was to delete them. But we didn't want to do that because we don't know what the status is. So we said, hey, you know what? If we didn't hear back from you, we're assuming that you did not complete those actions. And that, as I said, I'm going to release the draft plan for you to review. And what we want is your comments back on that. One of the things is we've got some mapping in there. If you've got better, more capable maps, absolutely, we'd love to see those, right? If you've got a map that you think can replace a map that we have in here that is more impactful and meaningful, you will not hurt our feelings. We would be more than grateful to receive that. One of the things that I will tell you is that we try to use very, very hard data to do this plan. There's not a lot of feelings. It's a lot of hard data. And if you're submitting things to us, we ask the same, because we don't want it to be subjective in any way. We want it to be data driven when we are trying to do analysis. And we know that that's hard to do, and it does put some limitations on the plan, but understanding risk by doing it as emotion driven is very, very hard to do. We also want you to submit any new mitigation action items based on what we've seen today and what we've seen in the past. If there's anything that you want to add, please tell us. I know that, again, Stefan at Dunsmuir, he's done this. He said, hey, we've looked at our old actions. We want to add some new ones. And so he said, hey, we're going to jump ahead. And I was like, perfect. So he went and said, we want to identify these gaps and submit these plans. We're asking the same from you as well. Now, if you do not want to submit any new mitigation action items, okay, we're okay with that too. And that's perfectly reasonable. Just make sure that you've got actions that cover all of the identified hazards. Okay, let's talk about our public meetings coming up on November the 4th. So that's about a week from now, a little over a week from now. This is the tentative agenda for the public meetings. We're going to do a review of the hazard mitigation plan. In many ways, it will mirror our first meeting, which was a public. We're going to do a review of the hazard mitigation plan. We're going to review participating jurisdictions and the participating requirements, just like we did today. We're going to review our identified hazards, and we're going to give them handouts as to how they may have been impacted by that hazard. So we'll say, hey, here are the hazards. Has anything impacted you specifically? We're also going to review our hazard mitigation actions, and we're going to say, do you have any new suggested actions? So is there anything that if someone handed you a bag of money that you would like to see done for your community to make it safer in the long run? We're going to review the plan format and sections. So again, we're going to talk about what the plan, in general terms looks like. We're going to have an open discussion, and then we're going to talk about the next steps. And for the public, the next steps are going to include the capability for them to review the plan and to fill out a public survey based on the plan. Okay.
This is Jenny Coelho.
Hey, Jenny.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing super, thank you.
So apparently Tule Lake was one of the ones that did not respond, possibly.
Huh?
is there any way, I know a couple of the things that were submitted on the old plan have been completed. When we submit our new stuff that we want added with this, can we still delete some of those that
100%.
are not applicable?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So what I ask is for those of you that haven't pushed through fully with the old actions, and that's okay. Again, I'm trying not to point any fingers of blame here. Most of us are wearing 8 million hats, and it's hard. So if you submit me your hazard mitigation action items, and if you would like, send me an email and say, Matt, can you send us your version of our mitigation action items? Because I've done some stuff to them and it probably will make it easier on you. And so if you would like my version of your old actions, please just send me an email and I'll send it to them. And then all you have to do is add your new actions on there and send me that back, and bang, zoom, we're done.
Perfect. Thank you.
Got it. Happy to help. Okay, so let's talk about our checklist for our upcoming public meeting. First of all, we'd like you guys to attend because you're a representative of your community, and so it's good for your community members to see the leaders attending. We'd like you to post the details on the meeting on your website, social media, and if you want to, in an analog way as possible, pop a flyer up. When we release the plan, we want you to post the plan on your website and again in an analog copy so that people can review it if they want to, along with the link to the public survey and a hard copy of the public survey. We recognize that not everybody is, super internet savvy, and no harm, no foul there. That's perfectly fine. But we do want to give them an opportunity to provide input if we can. And the hope is that those folks that are a little bit more analog will maybe attend our in-person meetings, which would be great to see them. Now, what I would ask is, based on our tentative agenda here, is there anything that you would like to see added to the public meeting? I will tell you that my words are failing me. Good gosh, Friday afternoon. I will tell you that I run my public meetings very much like I do here. I try to be as collaborative as possible. I try to answer questions in the moment when possible. So I try to run it as an open discussion rather than me sort of, just talking. Although it does seem that way at this point on a Friday afternoon, and I do apologize. So, is there anything anybody would like to see other than this? I kind of gave folks there a chance to figure out if they wanted to put anything in there. So let's talk about our next steps. In general terms,
Matt, I think Stephen was trying to talk.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. I didn't hear. I didn't get anything coming through.
Sorry, was it broken up? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
I was just saying if there's a way that like the individual mitigation actions for each community, if people could go to those like tables or areas and like kind of provide input there for those actions, I think that would be helpful for individuals.
That's a great idea. So I'm writing a note here to myself, print actions for meeting. No problem. That's a great idea. Thank you. So yep, we can absolutely put that in there and make sure that they've got a capability to review what's there. And then they can also, with their capability of suggesting new actions with analog forms that they can do. Now, so you know that when we do our online survey, we also ask the same questions on there. They have an entire comment field where they can say, if someone handed you a bag of money, what would you like to do with it? Any other suggestions? Okay. So let's talk next steps. In rough terms, this is what I see our remaining schedule to be. Now, again, this is in rough terms, and it depends on a lot of things. Like, November, we tried to run a meeting on November 5th, and turns out that I forgot that that was election day. So again, these are rough term dates. But what we'd like to do is we want to release the draft version of the plan in its totality to you on next Monday, and then give you through November the 4th, or the meeting date, to review it. Now, you can have more time to review it, but we want you to have an idea about the plan in totality before we jump into that public meeting, in case any of your members of the public ask you questions about it. That public meeting is on Monday, November the 4th. And so we're going to run two of them, one in Wairika, one in Dunsmuir. We're then going to do a public review period. And now this is a little bit flexible on these dates. The public review period, I envision running November 5th through 19th, a 2-week period there. But that really depends on what happens in those public meetings and the feedback from you, whether we want to do some big changes to the plan or some small changes to the plan. It really does depend on that. But that's an idea on the date. We then, on the heels of that, want to do one final meeting with the Mitigation Planning Committee so that we can kind of circle back and say, hey, this is what we heard. This is the feedback that we heard, and have a talk about that to see, that we're all on the same page. Once that is done, what we'd like to do is seal the plan up and submit it to Cal OES for review. And we anticipate that being end of November, beginning of December. And then we're hoping that Cal OES will then say, hey, the plan looks great. Let's get it up to FEMA, who will review it and hopefully approve it. Now, that's not always a guarantee for FEMA approval. Usually, if Cal OES likes it, FEMA likes it, but that's not always a guarantee. FEMA may kick it back and say, hey, we'd like you to change this, and we will immediately do it and resubmit for approval. That is the time period that we're working on. Now, I know that this is accelerated. In fact, this whole process is usually a 9+ month process, but because of you guys, we've squeezed it into, about a 6-month period here. We started in the middle of June, and we're 4 months into the process, and we've done the lifting of 8 months and 4 months. So I want to thank you all for helping me along with this. But we want to get this approved so that you guys get coverage, because right now your plan is expired and you are unable to apply for hazard mitigation grant funding. And so the goal from the get-go was to accelerate this as fast as we possibly could to get this approved as fast as possible so that you come back into coverage. So that is our remaining schedule. Again, this is tentative, but I wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I think someone's breaking up. I'm not sure. I'm getting every other word or something.
Yeah, sorry, it's me. I took my headset off.
No problem.
Do the individual jurisdictions have to have it adopted before it gets approved by FEMA or after it gets approved by FEMA?
Great question. Cal OES will tell you that you do not, they do not like it for jurisdictions to adopt before it's submitted, because if FEMA does request changes, some jurisdictions are a little bit, if I use the word, squeamish about adopting a document that may undergo changes. And so Cal OES's recommendation is always submit the plan, get approved pending adoption status from FEMA, and then adopt right away.
Got it. And are we expecting that maybe in January at the earliest?
It depends on a whole bunch of things, if I'm being quite honest. Cal OES, so you guys all know, I've been working with Cal OES, and they have a very, very early draft version of this plan that they're looking at so that they know what's coming their way. And we haven't heard anything back from them yet, which is indicative that they're very busy. And, I don't know what the review period is going to be. But we pre-submitted it to them in order to grease the wheels a little bit for this submission coming up. Assuming they like it, assuming they don't come back with anything seriously, they should then approve that fairly quickly. And then FEMA becomes the wild card. Technically, they have 45 business days to be able to review the plan and then either approve it or send it back for revision. If they send it back for revision, technically, then they have another 45 days to review those revisions. Now, I will say they are very good on not doing that. They are very good on, if you submit the plan, they will then say, okay, we see the changes. We will now approve this. However, FEMA, due to exigent circumstances, can say, we are extending the 45-day period because fill in the blank. And if they do that, we don't have a lot of leverage for that. And so I'm hoping that if we get this in, we can get this back by January, February with approval. That's what my hope is. But I'm not holding my breath on that. Okay. So, any questions, comments, concerns? We went over quite a bit today, but I think a lot of it is stuff that you've already seen. You know, when we talk about the mitigation actions, you've seen them. When you talked about the hazards, we know what they were going to be. You've seen now how they're spread out, capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. But we did cover a bunch of new stuff. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Anything that you'd like to talk more about? Oh, it's Friday afternoon and I've talked plenty. Okay. So I want to say thank you guys for being here. And I want to say more importantly, thank you guys all for your help with this process. Really, we couldn't have done it without you. And I'm grateful for everything that you've done, for every piece of feedback, for every discussion. It only furthers to make our plan better and stronger. We're going to start releasing some stuff to you. So look for the full draft version of the plan next week. You can call me and talk to me about it. I next week is a rare week. I don't believe I travel anywhere, and so I should be in the office for most of the time. So if you're reviewing the plan and you want to talk to me about things, please don't hesitate to call me. I'm genuinely happy to have a conversation about anything, in the plan and up to and including, the local sports teams. So I'm happy to talk about anything. If you want to send me emails with notes about the plan, please do so because we'll incorporate that in there. Now, I will tell you that sometimes we incorporate things. Sometimes I'll talk to you and say, hey, let's talk about incorporating this. Just because you send it to me doesn't mean that it is a good fit necessarily for the plan, but we'll talk about it. And then I will see, hopefully, all of you, real and in person, next week, next Monday. And again, we're going to have lots of time around those meetings. So if you just want to sit down and chat with me about stuff, I'm also very happy to do that as well. So lots of avenues. Review the plan, take a look at it. If you have questions about your mitigation action items in particular, or if you want to see my revised version of your mitigation action items, just shoot me an email and say, Matt, send me those actions. I'd like to see them, and I absolutely will. So, other than that, again, thank you so very much for joining us, and I hope you guys all have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.